Welcome along to our Christmas event where we are exploring the magic of Christmas, of course, at this time of year. Welcome along to the Early Excellence Centre. For those of you who are here face to face, you've got lots to see, lots to explore. We're going to be talking about all kinds of different things, and thank you very much for coming along to the centre. We are also, of course, joined by lots of people. I think actually hundreds of people who are joining us online as well at the minute. So a big hello to you people as well who are joining us from home using the power of technology. We've got 3 different sessions for you. First session, first of all, which is going to be myself talking all about domestic role play at this time of year. Okay, so the magic of domestic role play at this time of year. Then we're going to be, you're going to have a bit of time to explore, and then what we're going to do is we've got a session with Nova Robinson, talking all about Christmas books and winter books, or books to use at this time of year with your children. And then following on from that, we've got a session with our colleague Matthew Sayer on our curriculum team, and he is going to be talking all about learning outdoors in the winter and all sorts of different things linked to that. Okay, right. So, domestic role play then, to start off with. Whenever we talk about domestic role play, it's always an interesting one. We would always recommend, here at Early Excellence, we'd always recommend that in terms of domestic role play, it's important, in terms of, for early years children, keeping a domestic role play area right the way through the year for our children. Okay, so we would recommend that it doesn't need to get swapped over, it doesn't need to be changed over into something else, it doesn't need to become a space station or anything else. It can be a domestic role play area right the way through the year. And we would say that because when we think about young children and young children's natural interests, so one of the key things for young children is that connecting with their own lives. So that immediacy, something that for them makes perfect sense. It's one of those natural interests for young children to pretend to be the key people in their own lives. You know, they'll pretend to be their mum, their dad, their brother, their sister, even pets come into it, don't they? So they do all of that kind of thing. So that is why we would say keep it all year round. It's a rich context for all sorts of learning. However, at this time of year, I'm always well aware that I think as teachers and practitioners, the role play area ends up being a little bit under threat. We kind of get to this point in the year and we think, oh, you know what, Christmas is coming, that's great, it's so exciting, Christmas is coming. And Pinterest and all sorts of other sites that are out there, they're full of photographs of elf wrapping stations and Santa's grottos and magical tents and all sorts of things. And they can be great, they can be really magical. However, they're quite abstract, I think. They're quite abstract ideas. It's not easy to explain what do you do in a Santa's grotto, really, you know, for a young child. It's not easy to explain and to show children what do you do in terms of wrapping presents and all of those sorts of things in terms of an elf wrapping station or whatever it might be. However, keeping your role play as a domestic role play area does make sense. We don't need to change the whole thing over. What we can do is provide an enhancement. So enhance it for Christmas, okay? So adding in key things that actually will appear in different people's homes at this time of year. And it's a great way of really adding the magic of Christmas into your learning environment without changing a huge amount around that space. So adding in things like, well, for example, a Christmas tree, as we've got here, adding in the Christmas tree. Adding in perhaps presents and stockings and all sorts of different things that you would have at this point in the year within an area like this. Adding in all sorts of other things too that make sense at this point in the year. So when you think about what else will be appearing in homes at this point in the year, an advent calendar. That's a great way, a meaningful way of talking about how actually the days are passing, getting nearer towards Christmas. Lots of number opportunities to talk about number in a meaningful context there, of course. And when we think about the detail, there are all sorts of other opportunities as well. So you might want to think about if you've got your washing machine in the domestic role play area. What we're going to need to put in the washing machine at this time of year, well, we'll have our Christmas jumper, we'll have our Christmas pyjamas in there, we'll have warm socks as well, we'll have all of those sorts of things. Little ways of connecting with children, where children will say, oh, I know somebody's got a Christmas jumper like that, or I've got one like that at home, or whatever it might be. Little ways of connecting between what's happening here and our children's lives, okay? Helping children to make sense of their own lives. Helping children to make sense of what's happening around them at this time in the year. So there are lots of things we could add in. You might want to think about things like cooking. Cooking, of course, will happen. Cooking and baking at this time of year in a kitchen like this. So what cookery books do we put into this space? Christmas cookery books, perhaps. Recipes to follow. Recipes to have a look at. All of those sorts of things. There are things like special Christmas cutters that we've got in there at the moment as well as things like weighing scales. Lots of opportunities for mathematics there, of course. So here what we can see is that we're talking about meaningful opportunities that are also rich in all sorts of opportunities for learning in a range of contexts. So from mathematics to using print to thinking about their own lives as a whole as well. So baking opportunities. Opportunities to think about number with our advent calendar and our calendar on the wall. Christmas cards, talking about receiving and sending Christmas cards. That's an interesting thing to consider. And Christmas tree the Christmas tree as well. Talking about, even just simple similarities and differences provide rich contexts for talk, I think, within an early years classroom. So even within a classroom where actually all of your children might celebrate Christmas, if that is the case, there will still be differences. There'll still be similarities and there will be difference, even within the same celebration. So you'll have some children who it might be their routine in their home environment to have a new pair of pyjamas on Christmas Eve. And that they go to bed in a new pair of pyjamas, and that's the first present that they open on Christmas Eve. That's what they do. For other people, it will be something different completely, that they'll have different routines, different sorts of, different celebratory routines as part of the Christmas celebration. There will be similarities and differences between one household and another. But young children, of course, if you're 4 or you're 5, we tend to think, as young children think of their own lives and expect that actually everybody else's life is more or less the same. It really throws them completely when they're faced with somebody who does something a little bit different to them, that it's not the same. So this environment here, a Christmas domestic roleplay area, provides a rich context for those similarities and differences and the conversations and the connections to be made. Okay. In terms of enhancements generally at Christmas, I think it's important throughout to keep it meaningful. Okay, so we don't need to enhance every area of our provision because it's Christmas. Okay, we've got to think about sustainability in terms of our workload, I think. Changing over too much, changing over too many areas actually just ends up with staff who are really worn out at this time of year, and it's a tiring time of year anyway. Adding in some meaningful enhancements like the ones that you can see here in domestic role play, and perhaps 1 or 2 others, maybe to a writing area, to perhaps enhancing a mathematics area, as you can see as well within the classroom environment that we have here. A few enhancements, a few meaningful enhancements actually makes a lot of sense. Okay. Right. If this is something that you're interested in, you're going to have a bit of time now to have a bit of an explore around the centre, and you can come and have a really good look around within this space as well. If this is something that you're interested in, what you might want to do, if you go onto our website, if you go onto the Early Excellence website, earlyexcellence.com, if you go to the Ideas and Inspiration section, we've got a whole series of blogs, and one of them is all about domestic role play and enhancing domestic role play throughout the year. So once you've got that idea of enhancing it at Christmas, you might not want to stop there. You might want to think, well, actually, there are other points in the year that I might enhance this space. So enhancing it for Diwali, for example. Enhancing it for different celebrations, again, in a meaningful way. Enhancing it because there's a new baby going to be introduced into this space, or a really special moment. That might be something you decide to do. Enhancing it because there's a new pet that you're going to have in this space. So not having all of the things just there, but enhancing at particular points in the year might be something you consider. Okay? Christmas, of course, is just one of those things. All right, so on the Early Excellence website, the Ideas and Inspiration section, there are lots of blogs there that you might want to have a read of to really get you thinking about that idea of meaningful enhancement of domestic role play. Okay, right, I'll stop there so that you can have time for a bit of an explore before we move on to our next session, which will be with Nova Robinson and in the cafe, okay, and talking all about books at this time of year. All right. See you shortly. Have a good evening, everybody. I can. How are we doing? Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you. I think you were here at the last one, weren't you? Was that right?
I was here.
Oh, bless you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. At least it's a bit milder now, not having to travel through the ice.
You've all got your mince pies and your lots, courtesy of Andy, which is great. I'm Nova. I'm one of the curriculum consultants at Early Excellence. I think I recognise a few faces. And to those of you watching this somewhere else, it's lovely that you're there too. So just going to spend 10 minutes or so just talking through a few books, but some of the links that we might be able to make looking at children both in early years and Key Stage 1. So of course we're going to start with the Nativity, and when I was looking and thinking about ideas, the theme that kept coming through that, and will come through in lots of your classrooms, is journeys, the idea of taking journeys and how that relates to the experiences of the children that we have and all the different reasons, particularly at this time of year, that we might go on those journeys. And of course the story of the Nativity is ideal for that. And we've got the stories of the family and the stories of the wise men and the shepherds and all the different reasons and the different routes that they took, which is fantastic for lots, branching out in lots of different ways when we're looking at teaching different ideas. And within that, you could carry on that journeys theme. So we've got opportunities, some great figures here, for making, say, board games to do with the journeys and perhaps the hazards that happen along the way or the places that you stop along the way. And then, of course, we move to other journeys, and you can see a selection of books there. We've got Father Christmas and the route he took, where he travels, where he starts, how he gets from there, which places he goes over or through, where he stops along the route, how he accesses all those different places, and all the logistics that some children will really get into. So that idea of following journeys, linking it to the journeys we have, is a really good one that follows through. And then we also go to the non-fiction, and we've got a couple of examples. Oh, don't worry, it's fine. At the end, the one about the wolf there, Walk with a Wolf, is lovely. It has one or two slightly more sort of gruesome details towards the end, so perhaps slightly older children. But the idea of the wolves following a journey and the reasons that they take that journey, that they need to go because they need to find food and it isn't where they are currently, so they need to find other places where that's offered to them. And the penguins, that's one of the books there, The Cross the Ice, where it's told as a story but it's also got the facts, so I think it's sometimes referred to as faction. So it's got in a different font, it's got the non-fiction side. But what's lovely about that is that it starts in January and it references that being the end of the summer because of where they are. And then it leads you through the year and the life cycle of the penguins and the journeys that they make when they have to go and find a place to have the chicks and they have to go back to the sea. And it ends up in December, but it's the start of summer. And that's that really nice contrast. And we do a lot of work thinking about cold places and animals from polar places and things like that. But you've got this lovely book, which is almost the reverse of that. So at the end, even though they're in this cold place, it's the summer for them. So you've got some lovely contrast there. And of course, we've got the classics like the snowman and the routes that he takes through that story as well. Just want to show you this book that you might have seen, but this is a lovely book. It's written really simply, and you can see really simple text, very simple illustrations, just a hint of colour. And what happens when we talk about the nativity with children and we do our performances and we set up our enhancements in Small World, is that it's almost as if this point is the end of that story. That there's the journey and the travelling to get to this point and meet the baby and be there in time and give the gifts. But then the story kind of finishes. What this does is develop that story, so you have got the shepherds travelling and the wise men travelling. And it's told from the point of view of the donkey who's carrying Mary. But then it takes the story on the next step. So once those people have left, those visitors have left, and the baby's there, then the family need to flee because there's danger for them, and where they are is no longer safe. So then the story continues, again, really simply, and it would work for much younger children, but actually, I worked with Key Stage 2 for a long time. You could use this with much older children and look at it much, much deeper. But the family then carry on, and again, you've got some lovely ideas of colours and settings, to the point where they reach Egypt and they find refuge. And you've got this recurring theme in here about hoping for the kindness of strangers. And I think given current circumstances, and given as well the experiences of some of our children, it might be things that they see, but it's going to be the lived experience of some of those children, or the lived experience of some of the people in their communities. So that being able to find links that make sense to them, that link to the things that we're talking about, I think is really important. So that's a lovely book and definitely one to look at. The other aspect I thought about to do with stories, at this time of year in particular, is the storytelling. The idea of gathering around the hearth in a winter's evening and telling those stories, or gathering around your interactive whiteboard with the flames flickering on your whiteboard to tell your lovely, lovely stories. And that, of course, is a tradition that's been there in every culture, every part of the world for centuries and centuries, that tradition of orally telling stories. And there are loads of stories to do with winter and Christmas time. Lots of them are fairly, perhaps not appropriate for children. There are lots of things like the Krampus, who steals the souls of children, or goes up to children and if they're good gives them treats, and if they're not beats them. So things that perhaps aren't quite what we might be looking at. But there are also figures from pagan stories or cultures around the world that are. And there's one of the goddess Hulda from Northern Europe. And she travels around, and in some stories she's beautiful and wears a red cloak, and in others she's an old woman with one foot flatter than the other because she spins all the time. But she travels around and puts treats in the shoes of the children as she goes from house to house, and sometimes she flies on a witch's broomstick, and sometimes she walks, depending on the version. But she's also the people in these stories who brings the first snowflakes by shaking out her eiderdown, and the feathers fall to the ground. And she's also the person that knits the blankets of snow and then lays them over the ground. So there's some lovely themes there. And then there are the tales that take us back to the Nativity. So in Italy and other parts of Europe, there's somebody, a woman who's often referred to, well, in Italy, she's La Befana, and it's a little bit like Babushka. And it takes us back to the Nativity because it's the story of a woman who's in her house, who's incredibly housebound, who spends all her days sweeping and cleaning and sorting the house, and doesn't hear the stories of the star in the sky, or the people following, or the story of the baby that's going to be born. But one day, some visitors arrive at the door, and they knock at the door, and they want directions to Bethlehem, and they want refreshments, and it's the wise men who've come to her house. So she brings them in, and she gives them food, and she talks to them, and she asks them what they're doing. And they tell her the story of the baby that's been born, and the star in the sky, and why the baby is significant, and the importance that the baby is going to have to the whole world in the future. And she listens. And before they leave, once she's given them directions, they ask if she wants to join them. But she's too busy. She can't leave yet because the floor isn't swept, and she can't come back to an untidy house. And in the story of Babushka, she wants to give gifts to the baby when she gets there. And she has toys, and it's perhaps a little sad, but she had a child who died young, and she has the toys from that son, but she won't give them to the new baby until she's cleaned and polished them all. So in both stories, She gets too involved, can't go yet because, and I'm sure we've all been there, can't do that yet because I need to finish this, that and the other. And she doesn't go. But then as she's sweeping the floor with her broomstick, she suddenly realises that she's made a mistake. So at that point, she grabs her things, throws them all together, and follows the wise men and tries to catch up with them. But it's too late, they've gone. And she doesn't know where they've gone, so her story is then one of journeys. And then that develops so that every house that she then visits, she leaves gifts for the children. And they leave bread and milk or something for her. So she's trying to find the baby Jesus. And in some stories, she never gets there. But in other versions, she does reach Bethlehem. She does find the inn and she does find the stable, but it's empty. But the innkeeper tells her the story and tells her the whole story. And she then takes that story back, journeys back, and passes that story on to everybody that you meet. So then you've got an opportunity for, how would you tell the story? You know, if you meet this person, tell them the story. As you travel around the school, tell them the story and so on. So then we've got that link to folklore, to traditions, and you can do some amazing work looking at the descriptions and how the stories change. I think is really lovely to look at as well, how people are represented. You know, is it the old woman in the cloak who, you know, has the flat foot, or is it the beautiful woman in the white dress with the long flowing hair who sprinkles the snowflakes, or whatever it is. But in amongst all of these, you've got the journey, which whether it's the origins of some of our Christmas traditions, it takes us back such a long way and across so many different cultures, or whether it's thinking about the story of the Nativity as we know it, and I'm sure lots of you are relentlessly practicing various elements of that at the moment. It's that idea of stories that have a journey, and that idea of moving through a story that we want children to take on. So then looking at things like Snowman, like the Polar Express, and we're going from the beginning and we're travelling through. We're stopping at different places and different things are happening to us there. So you've got some lovely links there that of course bring us back to journeys that the children have taken, because it's that, you know, that need to come back to and start from where they are, give it a context that makes sense to them really, before we do things that otherwise are a little bit out of their understanding. So hopefully you have a look at these, have a play with the toys and things there, think about what you could do with them, have a play with these that we've made out of little bits of fabric, decorated the wooden blocks, and have a look at some of the stories, because they're definitely worth looking at. And if you want to chat, I know we're going to have a chat about planning stories and things, aren't we, in books, then I'm around for the rest of the session. So thank you for listening to that. There are still mince pies and Yule logs available, I think. And in about 15 minutes, Matthew's going to be talking to you. You'll still be in here, but you'll be facing that way. He's going to talk to you about some things to do with outdoors. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome to our last session tonight. Welcome those of you here in our lovely cafe, and welcome to those of you at home streaming this live. I'm Matthew, I'm a consultant here at Early Excellence along with Nova and Andy, and I'm just going to wrap things up tonight and for our festive Twilight. I'm going to say a few things about outdoor learning with a particular focus on the seasons. If those of you who were maybe watching at home last time, we've had one of these sessions before, and Andy last talked about outdoor learning with a kind of focus on the weather, and whatever the weather, we'll be outside engaging with our children. But tonight I'm going to take it and move it away to have a think about the seasons a bit more, and how we can maximise the potential of learning from the seasons. And the kind of phrase I just wanted to kind of take away tonight is noticing nature, and I'll refer to a report that's been done by Derby University and the National Trust to try and encourage us and our children to start noticing nature a bit more. And kind of wrapping it up with tonight's theme is thinking about the kind of things that, if we're not careful, as we grow a little bit older, and because they happen every year, we can't stop noticing them. So you might have noticed that this session is called Low Winter Sun and Long Shadows. And it's kind of to reinforce or just remind us of those simple pleasures in life that for lots of our children, it's the first time that they might be experiencing them. And try and take yourself back to that kind of feeling of excitement when you notice something for the first time. But it's also for us as adults to kind of remind ourselves to carry on delighting in those beautiful things that happen every day. So delighting in the everyday things. And one of the nice things about what I'm going to talk about is that it doesn't cost anything. It's just about kind of noticing nature a bit more. And what this report kind of unpicked, and this is a report, for those of you at home now, you might want to Google it, and you can have it there in front of you. It's called Noticing Nature, and it was just looking at the impact on our well-being of kind of connecting back with nature a little bit. It kind of came out about during COVID times, and the researchers at Derby University and the National Trust just wanted to have a think about our connection with nature, and they kind of tied it up with thoughts about being ecologically aware and connected to the environment, and just kind of did a little bit of unpicking. And what they kind of discovered was that time in nature is really good for our well-being. Hopefully you kind of know that. So just being out there is really good for our well-being. So if we're kind of thinking about how we develop our rich, broad curriculum, which we're being asked to do at the moment, particularly across the board, but also in the EYFS, one of those things that we want to be kind of thinking about is how we're going to support children's well-being, because if they're going to connect with and be successful through that broad, rich curriculum, we know our starting point is well-being. So if we get our children outdoors, noticing nature a bit, just being there is good for your well-being. But what the researchers found is that in order to have a real connection with nature, and then kind of take that on to want to become, to be, yes, ecologically aware, but also do something about nature conservation, you had to have that connection with nature. And what they discovered was it wasn't just about the time that you spent out there that was important, it's what you did when you were out there. So it wasn't so much that you need to spend lots of time out there to get that nature connectedness, it was what you did out there. And I kind of started to identify and unpick what these things were that kind of supported children and adults to become more connected to nature. And there were simple things like noticing the sun rising, noticing things like the long shadows, the low winter sun, noticing the sunset, listening to bird song, just being more aware of wildlife. So that whole kind of notion of kind of tuning into and noticing nature, they found as a lasting impact on what they called nature connectedness, then meaning that you'll go on and want to kind of conserve nature a bit more. I think there's kind of a feeling that we've got a generation of children kind of disconnected from nature a bit, and they've kind of we've stopped noticing nature. So that's the kind of call out from this document and this kind of research, that it wants us just to try and connect back with nature. And it kind of highlights a few simple things that we can do to do that. And really the first thing is for us to connect back and start noticing things with the children. So Andy would have talked about last time, if you were here, about jumping in puddles and kind of running your fingers through the frost or noticing the spider's web. So there's some of that of it as well, but it's also about noticing the way that the seasons kind of shift and how they move from one season out of the other and into the next one. And they're the things that sometimes, and certainly the report kind of highlights this, that go unnoticed a little bit as you kind of mature, and it just happens every year. So we don't notice it, we don't draw the children's attention to it, so it almost passes by without even noticing. So one of the things it recommends that you could do, for example, to get children noticing these things a bit more, is kind of pick a spot in your outdoor environment and at a point in the year highlight how the shadow lies on it, and then you can monitor that as you go through the year. So you might do it a month later, 2 months later, as you go through the seasons, and you can see how in the winter the shadow is so much longer, in the summer you struggle to find shade anywhere. And if we don't kind of point these things out to the children, it can just kind of go unnoticed almost. And because it kind of happens every year, we stop noticing it, so we don't kind of share that with the children. So again, that's kind of just an example of the sorts of things that this report is getting The other thing it kind of encourages to do, it talks about not worrying about being an expert. The important thing is that you notice, that you're kind of inspired by it, you talk about it, you share your thoughts about it. It's not about necessarily knowing that it's this kind of bird or that kind of bird. It's just noticing the things that are happening as the seasons shift. And in this book that I'll share with you in a moment, that's kind of linked to the report, there's a book by a chap called Andy Beer, called Everyday Nature. For those of you at home, Andy Beer, Everyday Nature. Can't recommend it enough. It's fab. It just takes you through every day of the year and suggests something that you could notice in nature with your children to get you kind of into the swing of it almost. And he talks about it's not about being an expert, it's just about doing it. But in time, you can start to become a bit of an expert. He talked about just skilling yourselves up a little bit and knowing what sort of birds you might be able to spot in the winter, because there are winter birds that come to us every winter, and we can kind of share that information with the children, spot them with the children, tune into the bird song of those particular birds. He also talks about one of the other elements that they kind of identified as being really important for that kind of nature connectedness is smelling flowers and engaging with the flora. So it's kind of, again, just identifying as a team what kind of things actually are around and about in this season, the coldest of seasons, and you can make that kind of link then with the spring and the summer. One of the things on the National Trust website they talk about is they're trying to encourage us to notice blossom more. And if you go on the National Trust website now, there's what they call Blossom Watch. And some blossom starts to appear in January, February, but obviously it kind of springs into life. See what I did there? Through the spring into the summer. So that's another way to kind of engage and kind of support the children to notice nature. The other thing that they kind of talk about, simple things. Again, it's all kind of simple things, simple pleasures. And Andy Beer makes reference to the simple woodlands. Another one of those things that sometimes you spend, because they're there all the time, you almost forget that they're there. But actually, when you think about woodlice, they are one of those kind of things that get one of those creatures that takes you all the way back to prehistoric times. And for lots of children, that's kind of fascinating. That it's the closest thing on Earth that we have to dinosaurs. 350 million years old woodlands. And if you kind of unpick it a little bit, he talks about it in his book, because they've been around with us so long, we have maybe like 10s, 20s of different names for them. Everyone calls them something slightly different, and that's because of the time that they've been on the planet with us. So it's those kind of simple pleasures that they talk about drawing the children's attention to. One of the other things, they talk about bird song, they talk about sunsets, the stars. Again, they did a little bit, as they kind of pulled the research together, they found that very few children had ever seen the sunset or seen the sunrise. So there's nice links there that you could have with parents as well to get them kind of engaged with that kind of noticing nature, because much as I'm sure you'd love to be at school or setting it for sunset, it might kind of stretch your working day out a bit. We're supposed to be all thinking about our workload at the moment, aren't we? So sunset, sunrise, looking at the stars, noticing the stars, something that you can make that link between school and home with. But again, just simple things, don't have to cost the earth, but what the research tells us is if we do these things with the children, much more likely to connect with nature and be interested in nature conservation in the end. The other thing that they talk about being really important or supporting that nature connectedness is taking pictures of nature, drawing nature, and there's another nice link there for us with our current EYFS. For those of you who've kind of been paying attention, so I'm sure you all have. Observational drawing is there in black and white now, and reference to drawing is there in kind of physical development. So not only would you be doing your duty by the EYFS, you'd be doing your duty by supporting children to connect even better with nature by encouraging them to take time to look at what's happening outdoors and record it in whatever way they see fit. It might be through drawings, could be fine photos, could be through paintings, whatever their chosen medium is. So I'm just going to wrap up. I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts from Andy Beer's book with you that might inspire you and leave, send you away with a spring in your step, wanting to make maximise the potential of learning outside. in the winter time, because I think it can be hard sometimes in the winter. You can be inspired in the spring, inspired in the summer, but what are we supposed to do in the winter? So Andy's book, and hopefully some things I've said tonight, will help you just kind of focus on those seasonal things, not necessarily connected to the weather, that are happening all the time that we can just draw children's attention to, and lots of potential learning from it. So on this very day, Andy highlights, they've got the 30th of November, it's National Tree Week. So he recommends that we kind of think about the trees, maybe spot the trees out and round about in your setting, or go for a walk, etc. Thinking about the trees, and kind of lists a lot of many of the our native British trees that to kind of, if you feel like you need skilling up, he kind of skills us up. So that's what if you were following Andy's path, you'd be looking at the trees and kind of focusing on the trees and thinking about the names of the trees today. Then as we kind of move into December, he talks about kind of having a plan for the new year, and kind of in your head you'll have ideas of the sorts of things that you're ready to spot, and that's what he asks us to do. So so in order to notice it, we need to remember that it's going to happen. So he talks about making a plan for December into January, knowing that the snowdrops will be popping up, the crocuses will be popping up. So it's kind of having those things in your mind to notice yourselves, and then notice with your children as well. And then last but not least, second to last actually, but not least, he talks about January. I'll just read you a little bit about what he says about January. He says, what is there to commend the month of January? It could be the month of leaden skies, wild winds, birds flock in gardens, and field edges hunting for food and shelter. Bones of hawthorn hedges clatter in the winter breeze. Yet when the wind turns east, there can be glorious, crisp days with air so dry that it catches your breath, and the crunch of a frozen puddle underfoot. This is the time to appreciate the skeleton spare beauty of winter, bark and branch, stone and soil. Although it doesn't feel like it, we are imperceptibly tilting back towards the sun each day. If you look carefully enough, nature is beginning to waken. And there's that kind of thing, that word that you may be aware of, apricity. I'll say that again, apricity. And it's the warmth of the winter sun. And as December fades into January, and January into February, you start to feel the warmth of the sun again. And that's that notion of apricity, which again, if we don't point it out and notice it, then it kind of goes unnoticed. So much to talk about, so much to kind of think about outdoors with children, even when it feels like there isn't that much going on. So I'll just leave you with these words from Andy's book. It's very short. He just says, notice a little bit of nature every day. It might just change your life. So yeah, I can't recommend that book enough. It's from the National Trust, I think. So I've got a couple of copies here that you can have a little browse through. So you're welcome to. So yeah, thank you ever so much for coming tonight. Thank you so much for listening. Those of you at home, thank you for listening and joining us tonight. And yeah, safe journey back for you guys. Safe journey back to the kitchen for you guys. And happy Christmas. Thank you.